Hi there, my name is Farron Hart and I am presenting my art integrated lessons. My painting was Migrating Mutants by Anne Coe. I'm not sure when it was painted, I had a hard time finding out that date. So I have integrated this lesson into 4 different disciplines. The first one is our social studies lessons. So I would actually start by talking about the painting itself, who painted it, tell a little bit about the author, about Anne, and kind of the things that her art represented and how she was an environmentalist and whatnot. And then we would talk about what the students saw within the painting itself. We see that there are lizards, that it's out in the desert, there are mountains. And then I would kind of transition into social studies and into our social studies standard, which is locate major topographical features on the Earth's surface. Identify and describe landforms such as mountains, deserts, valleys, and the coast. So we would kind of talk about that, how this painting has 2 of the land features that are identified within the standard. We would talk about some of these land features that we find here in the state of Georgia, like the coast, the valleys, the mountains. We don't necessarily have a desert here, but we would talk about where we would find a desert. Is there a desert here in the United States? Where else could we find a desert? And what really kind of makes up a desert? Because not only can a desert be hot, but it can also be cold. You've got deserts up in the north, the tundra and whatnot, that there's really not much life there because it has a overabundance, but it's too cold for anything to grow. So we would kind of talk about those things. Now the assessment would be, I would have the students create a book, Land Features, and within that book they would actually talk about a land feature and they would describe it. So they could draw mountains, and you say we can find mountains here in the state of Georgia. And then they could do valleys and coast, the deserts, and they would have a description of each of those. Now for the assessments, I would actually do like a rubric with a 1, 2, 3 scale. Currently my clinicals are in Cobb County, and Cobb County does 1, 2, and 3 plus and a 3 plus. So a 1 would be 1 land feature, a 2 would be 2 or 3 land features, and a 3 would be all 4. And then they would also be graded on the descriptions as well, because it was to identify and to describe the land features. So they would have to, to get a 1, they would have to describe 1 land feature. To get a 2, it would be 2 or 3. To have a 3, it would be all 4 land features. And then we would move on into our language arts. Now, I would actually we would pull back into the painting, we would look at the painting, and I would say, how does this painting make you feel? For me, I would explain that I kind of like the painting, and I like the fact, it's very whimsical to me. I think I like the colors, how they're muted colors. I like that it's a Gila monster in the middle of a desert creating havoc. I am a child of the Godzilla, all that, way back when, not this new CGI Godzilla. I am Godzilla, Tokyo, so I really kind of like this stuff. So we would kind of talk about that, and I would ask the students, how do they feel? What are they thinking about the painting itself? And then for my, so with the standard that I would pull in for language arts would be, students would write a narrative, SE1, W3, write a narrative in which they recount 2 or more appropriate sequence events, include some detail regarding what happened, and use temporal words to signal event order and provide a sense of closure. So I would actually group my students in their reading groups, and they would write a play about the painting. And they could write a play where what led up to this painting, or they could take it from the painting and finish it out, where the Gila monster's going to. But they would have to have 2 different sequences. They started in the desert, then they moved to the city, and then they made it to the ocean, and then they would have to close it out. But I would allow them to design that story, to bring in those sequences and their details and their closing, and then they would act it out in front of the class. So everybody would have a part, if they're all Gila monsters, or if they're the little cactuses, or the people in the street, or whatever they have chosen to write about within their play, they can be. So and then they would put in perform in front of the class, because I think kids like to perform what it is that they've done, that they've written, and they like to share it with their friends. So they would each have that opportunity to do so. So my assessment would be the play itself, and then we would, once again, it's another rubric, because we love the rubrics, and it'll be broken down into the groups, and they are, excuse me, it's not a rubric, it's a checklist. So they would have to have first sequence, their second sequence, a check mark for details, and a check mark, did they close it out, or did they just stop it? Sometimes kids in first grade will just stop stuff, and you're like, no, how did it end? I mean, they just didn't go, oh, well, I'm done, dinner time, and they leave. How did they end? And then sometimes their details can be a little non-existent, so you kind of have to pull those details out. So that's how I would incorporate the language arts. Next is math. So once we'd go back and look at that painting, and I would say, hey, what kind of shapes do you see within the painting? And they may not be, ooh, it's very obvious that this is a rectangle, but does it have that sense of shape? So one thing I really love about the painting is when you look at the mountain range, the mountains are a triangle, very much so. The desert is a rectangle. Even though you kind of have these pieces right in here, it's still kind of a rectangle. A lot of the cactuses, to me, are the kind of triangle when you include the shadows. The clouds could be long rectangles. The gillimossums themselves, like little skinny little rectangles. Not rectangles, but triangles too. So we would talk about the shapes that students can find within the painting. And I think it's kind of beneficial because it pulls them out of that whole concrete of, well, a square is 4 sides. But sometimes you have to think a little bit abstract and say, okay, well, it's not 4 complete sides, but it has the shape of that rectangle. Like especially the desert. It's straight and straight, but like right in here. But if we had removed this, it would be a rectangle. Triangle. So, it's, and, even, like I said, even within the characters themselves, you can see somewhat of a triangle. So, and then we would lead into the math, and we would pull out, because the math standard I chose is the distinguishing between, is a SE1G1, distinguishing between defining attributes like triangles or closed 3-sided versus non-defining attributes like color, orientation, overall size, build and draw, shapes to possess defining attributes. So the first thing that I would do is I would actually take attribute blocks, and I would have the students sort them. And they would do a sort, however they want to do a sort, because I think students learn a little more by hands-on. If I were to tell them, hey, sort out your 4-sided figures and your non-4-sided figures, they're just kind of doing what I say. They're not really looking at what it is that the shapes themselves. They're just like, oh, I got to look for 4 sides and put them over here, and the non-4 sides are going on that side. So by allowing the students to kind of work and look at these things, they look at the vertexes, they look at the sides, and they're like, okay, well, I'm going to sort them this way. And they may sort attributes and non-attributes. They may say, oh, I'm going to put the yellow ones over here and the 3-sided ones over here. Oh, but I have some yellow 3-sided. They may put those in the middle. So it's allowing them to sort them how they choose to sort them. And then we would stop, and I would ask students, how did you sort that, and why did you sort it that way? So they're having to do critical thinking of why they've sorted them like that. And then we would resort them again, but they can't sort the same way that they just sorted. They have to come up with something new, a new way to sort them. So it requires them to think a little more about what it is that they're actually doing and say, okay, well, I sorted them by 4 sides and large, so maybe this time I might do no sides, circles, and 4 sides over here. Oh, but what does that leave my 3 sides? It just kind of really gets them thinking about the shapes and their attributes, the attributes that truly define what a shape is. So with 5, 6, so with the assessment, I I think I'm going to do kind of like it's a checklist, and I'm going to call out, I have 4 sides, and all 4 sides are equal. Draw me. What am I? Kind of thing. And have the students do that. Have them kind of draw out. They may, surely by first grade, they know what a square and a rectangle and a triangle are. But I do have some sweet first graders who struggle with that now. So, but this is a great way to kind of reinforce what it is that they already know. But taking those geometrical shapes, we can incorporate an art lesson and do a print pull with a styrofoam. I really enjoyed learning how to do that, and we would actually do that in class. So I would take my example that I did for art class, and I would show the students how we did that. I would show them that my example, and then I would take a clean piece of styrofoam and I would trace in and do my my geometrical shapes, my squares and my circles and triangles. I did put some lines in here, and I don't really have rectangles, but I would have them do all their shapes, and then we would kind of color them, and then we would talk about the process of how to do the pull, how we slightly wet the paper, and we put our print we put the paper on top of our print, and we rub it so we can transfer, and then we'd recolor it again and do a couple more print pulls so they can do their little arts. And and it's even fun to, you have your first print, and then you go off and you have your second print, and you can talk about how the balance or the value, because one's darker and one's lighter, and you can talk about that with your class. So that's a great thing to do with the geometrical shapes with the print pull. And then and with the print pull, we would have like a yes/no checklist. So if they had squares, they would color yes or no if they didn't have any, and triangles and rectangles. So they can, once again, associate those shapes in with what it is that they are doing. And then my final is science. So with the science, I would go back to the painting, and we would talk about things what we saw that are related with the science. And, within the painting, you see the Gila monsters, you see plants, you see weather, and you see a little bit of electricity going. But I would actually kind of pull it into the plants and animals, but the standard that we're going to use is a science standard, S1L1, obtain, evaluate, and communicate information about the basic needs of plants and animals. So we see they're both Gila monsters and plants there, and the plant is a cactus. So I would actually kind of talk about plants. I'm going to have a couple of books, a couple information about cactuses, because that's what's in the painting, to kind of make that connection, because kids know, they see flowers all the time. They see plants, if their parents plant gardens, if they have grass, if they see a weed grow, a lot of science when it comes to plants are typical plants that we see every day. So I would actually incorporate a cactus, because even though a cactus has the same needs, they grow a little bit different. And I would show a video of a desert where there are cactuses, because when you see a time lapse and the rain comes, cactuses bloom. And I don't think a lot of children know, a lot of students know, a lot of adults know that cactuses have blooms to them. They also flower. And given the right things that they need, they go through the whole cycle. So it will be a little cactus heavy, because that's what's in our painting. And I think that's really kind of neat to know about stuff like that. So I would talk about how a cactus needs water, but it doesn't need a lot of water, and that's why it grows in the desert. And how they need sunlight. It gets a lot of sunlight. And how it is kind of tolerant to the cold and the heat, because it gets cold in the desert, as well as it gets really hot all in one day. So, we would have we would talk about that. We would talk that it does need food, and it has a root system, and how the roots go down into the soil to find the nutrients and whatnot. So I think it's really important that kids get a feeling of all kinds of plants, and they see a variety of plants, not just a flowering one. So what we would do is we would actually draw a picture of a plant for our assessment, and the plant that we would use would be a cactus, and they can draw whatever cactus that they want. So like for me, I drew that cute little cactus that you see that has the red top, and I didn't put a flower. I kind of ran out of room for a flower. But you know, you see the sun because it does need sunlight, the soil, so you need the roots, a little bit of water. That's like a little bit of rain coming down because they don't need a lot of water, and they don't really get a lot of water from the soil because there's not a lot of water in the soil. It really kind of, when the rain comes, or dew, as the dew settles onto a plant in the morning, onto the cactus in the morning. So it would be once again another checklist. Did the student do a drawing? Was food represented? Water, sunlight? So I hope you enjoyed the video of the lesson, and I really had a lot of fun. Thank you, and have a great afternoon.